Today, we're talking tier lists, and we're going to be breaking down all of the starter cards you get when you first enter MarvelSNAP. Although these are starter cards, and everyone will have access to them very early on in the game, some of the top end of these starter cards actually make up key components of the best decks in MarvelSNAP, even in the end game with full collections in Pool 3. There's a bit of something for everyone here. We're going to jump in. Let's go. Hey, Milky here, back again with another video for MarvelSNAP. That's right, we're talking tier lists. We're getting into the starters. We're going to be kicking this off. We'll be looking at Pool 1 and 2 a little bit down the track and even into Pool 3 as well. But we're going to kick things off right at the beginning with starter cards. As I said before, don't get it twisted. Starter cards are actually not only viable, but make up key components of really strong late game decks in MarvelSNAP. So if you're brand new to the game and just getting into it, I think this is going to be super helpful for you. But even if you are pushing through Pool 1 into Pool 2 and the rest of the collection track, it's really good to know what cards are actually strong even late on in the game. You can also look to prioritize your upgrades so you can get the most out of the cosmetics and the effects that you're getting out of split cards. One really quick note, tier lists, no matter where they are, they should be taken with a grain of salt because they are completely opinion based. Look, there are some general opinions in the community which are held that some cards are quite strong and others maybe not so much. But overall, they are generally based on someone's opinion and experiences and interactions with those cards. It's no different for me, so you might have different opinions to me and that is completely okay. I'd love to hear about them in the comments. With that being said, let's go ahead and jump right into this starter card tier list. So with all of these starter cards, I'll rank them as best I can in terms of where I think they sit generally across the entire game of MarvelSNAP. Some cards do change a little bit as you go through the pools, but I'll generally provide a bit of a talk through on how relevant they are in the early game as well as late game, and then we'll kind of drop them in a slot of where we think they best fit. Okay, so first cab off the rank we have is Abomination. Abomination is a vanilla card. He's a vanilla character in this game, just meaning that he doesn't have any abilities. He's a 5-cost, 9-power card, and I just think he is very quite average at the moment, even after a recent buff. I'm going to drop him in E tier. I don't think he's super usable in the game, especially early on. Okay, so next up we have Ant-Man, and if you've watched any of my other videos, we all know how I feel about Ant-Man. Ant-Man's an absolute weapon in this game. He's an amazing unit. He's 1 cost, 1 power, which has the ability to go all the way up to 4 power with a very easy to complete ongoing ability. Ant-Man's an awesome card, makes his way into a ton of decks. He's S tier as S tier gets. Now we have Blue Marvel, and Blue Marvel got a recent buff, taking him from 6 cost to 5 cost, which makes him so much more playable. I think Blue Marvel is a super strong card, which makes his way into a lot more decks now, even in the late game of MarvelSNAP. That's something to consider as well. Blue Marvel for me is an A tier character, lots of utility. He's got a simple ongoing ability, but it can provide a ton of power across the board if you've got lots of cards out. So now we have Colossus, and Colossus is actually a really strong card, I think. His ability to resist his power being changed can make him work in locations like Death's Domain, he can't be destroyed, but also he works in things like Sewer System where you can't actually change his power. He's a pretty interesting card, relatively versatile, makes his way into some destroy decks later on as well, which is interesting to note. But I think he's a bit middle of the road. His power is kind of fine for a 2-drop, but he's nothing special. I'm dropping him in C tier and leave him there. Next up we have Cyclops, and Cyclops is again a complete vanilla minion in this game. Some utility later on with some decks in the end game, but at the moment he's just a very basic card with no ability. I'm going to drop him in E tier, and I think that's where he belongs. We're looking at Gamora now, and Gamora is actually a really strong card after her most recent buff. She has the potential of going all the way up to 12 power, and for a 5-cost card, that's awesome. I think if you can activate her ability, which is much easier to do later on in the game, mind you, if you can activate that ability, get her to 12 power, she's an awesome, awesome push onto the board, especially in a single lane. I think she's up at A tier. Lots of people are going to probably have different opinions about this, but I think Gamora is an awesome card and definitely underutilized in a lot of decks. Then we have Hawkeye, and as much as I love Jeremy Renner, I don't know about Hawkeye in this game. He needs some love. He needs a buff. He's going into E tier for me. Very much telegraphs your next move if you're looking to get the most out of him, but he just doesn't bring a lot to the table in comparison to some other one drops out there, which are super versatile. So sadly, Hawkeye E tier for me. That's enough said. We then have Hulk. Hulk's a 6 power 12 drop, and although he's a vanilla minion, I feel like he is significantly better than the other vanilla minions out there. He recently got a buff taking him from 11 power to 12 power, which is a nice buff for sure, but I just feel like he has a bit more utility than other cards. Again, people are probably going to have different opinions about this, but for me, I'm going to drop him in D tier. I think he's playable in some decks, definitely not in a lot though. Then we have Iron Man, and Iron Man is an S tier card. You'll see throughout the game that he makes his way into an absolute ton of decks, even in Pool 3. Iron Man's a powerhouse in terms of just doubling down on a location's power. He is countered pretty easily by a couple of cards out there, but I think Iron Man provides such a big push to a location. If they don't have those cards in their deck, they can be in trouble, and it can be a very easy card to win you a location straight off the bat. Next up, we have Ironheart, and for me, Ironheart is an A tier character. I'm sure all the Pool 1 players are just loving Ironheart at the moment with all of the Odin decks going around, but Ironheart is just a solid card. She represents 3 cost and 6 power, potentially if you have other cards out on the board. She's quite versatile in a lot of decks and works extremely well with Odin. So she's just a great way to push power out on the board, has some good synergies early on, and just a strong card in general. We then have Jessica Jones, and she's recently got what I think is a buff, bringing her to a 4-4, but potentially all the way up to a 4-8 if you can activate her on-reveal ability. Her on-reveal ability is very straightforward to activate. It's just not playing a card there next turn, so you can often get the full value out of her. For me, she's a B tier card. I think she can actually support a lot of decks nowadays, and she has similar power to a lot of other cards that are in a similar spot later on in Pool 3, like Drax and Crossbones, but she has a bit more utility in my book. So I like Jessica Jones. I think she is a pretty strong card. We then have Medusa, and I think Medusa is the ultimate starter card. She's kind of the card that everyone upgrades at the start, and she represents a pretty good power, especially if you can play her into middle. So a 2-4 is nothing too shabby at all. She is very basic though in her ability. I think she provides a good power push on the board, but she'll be quickly replaced by stronger 2 drops down the track. In the early stages of the game, I think Medusa's pretty strong actually, and she does quite well. But I think overall I'm going to drop her in the C tier. I considered putting her in the B tier, and I think she is quite strong early on in the game. But as you progress throughout the game, I'd rather put her in C. I think that's a better spot for her. For the most part, she's just a 2-4 body on the board, which doesn't do a whole lot outside of that. We then have Misty Knight, another vanilla character. Very basic, no ability at all. We're going to drop her in E tier and leave her there. Again, does get better later on in the game, but I think this is a spot where she just fits in E tier, and you probably want to sub her out of your decks as soon as you get something stronger. Mr. Fantastic's a pretty fun card. Works really well with ongoing decks. Whether you're doing the Spectrum ongoing deck or even the Onslaught, you can get some sneaky power across the board. I don't think he's game breaking in any way, shape, or form, but I think he does relatively well. So for me, I'm going to put Mr. Fantastic in B tier. Often people forget that he could be a 3-6 if played in the middle location. That's some good power. That's definitely nothing too shabby. He also only takes up 1 board space, which is quite nice when pushing that power. So I'm going to put him in B tier. I think he does get a little bit worse later on in the game, but he works well with some of the core ongoing decks and buff decks early on. So I'm pretty happy with putting him in B. Nightcrawler, especially early on, I'm going to put him up in S tier. He's an awesome card that just has a lot of utility in terms of stretching power to unreachable locations. You can also move him whenever you want throughout the entire game, which is super strong, as you can react to your opponent's plays. As you play more and more Nightcrawler, you realize how versatile he can be and the options that he gives you on the board in the game. Odin is flying all the way up to S tier for me. Odin's on-reveal deck is one of the strongest decks you can be playing early on in the game. It's really consistent. You get access to all of the pieces really early, and Odin can just double down on all those strong on-reveal abilities. He's an awesome card. 6/8's also some great power push onto the board late on in the game. Odin's a really strong card. He even makes his way into some Pool 3 decks as well. So really strong card, consistent throughout the entire game of MarvelSNAP. We then have Quicksilver, and I think Quicksilver is slightly better than vanilla minions. I'm going to put him in D tier. He makes your first draw pretty consistent. You have something to play on turn 1. But for the most part, he's just a small body on the board, which doesn't really do a lot. Quicksilver can be used later on in the game, as with a similar card called Domino, You can use them in certain decks like Agatha decks, but for the most part, he's just a pretty weak one drop. So we then have Sentinel, and maybe I'm being generous, but I think Sentinel is pretty dang good. I'm going to put him in B tier. He's able to replicate himself and provide a duplicate Sentinel in your hand, which can help you really fill out some turns if you're missing 2 energy and you want to utilize that energy. He's a great way to fill out curves if you don't have the cards in hand to do so. 2/3 is actually really good power as well for a card with his ability, so I think he definitely has a spot in B tier, potentially even higher, but I'm going to keep him here for now. Shocker, another vanilla character. Gets better later on in the game, but I think E's a safe spot for him with all the other vanilla minions we have here. And sadly Hawkeye. So then we have Spectrum, and in Marvel Snap you get access to Spectrum really early on, which is a great card for ongoing decks. If you're able to get a ton of ongoing cards out throughout the earlier turns, she can buff them all by 2, which is a huge push on the board across all of your cards later on. So I think I'd put Spectrum in a high B, low A tier. I think she fits right in the middle here. Not quite as strong as the other A tier characters, but not quite as weak as those in B tier. I'm going to drop her in the A tier. She's definitely at the bottom end of the A tier, but I think she provides a really good boost to ongoing cards, albeit a very kind of simple interaction with them. She's going into A tier on the lower end for me. So we have another Guardian of the Galaxy, and that is Star-Lord, and I think Star-Lord is C tier. I don't think he is great in the game in his current state. He's a bit awkward to play on turn 2. It's often hard to guess where your opponent's going to be playing that early on in the game, so you're often not going to get his full value. If you are playing him later on in the game, I think there's just better turns you could potentially be making than Star-Lord. So for me, he's if you can get his on-reveal ability, he represents a really good power push, but it's so hit or miss, especially at that stage of the game, that I think C tier is a relevant spot for him. So then we have Punisher, and I think Punisher's a little bit better than people give him credit for. I'm going to put him in the B tier. He works well with the Spectrum ongoing deck. He can also represent a decent push of power on the board for sure, going up to a 3/6 if you're able to fill out that location, or at least if your opponent is. But I think he represents a decent card on the board. There's also these mind games that you play in Marvel Snap, and the Punisher is a way to punish an opponent playing into a location. So that's something, just additional consideration that they've got to think about. So you've always got to consider these things when playing cards in Marvel Snap. It's not just about their value or their power they're pushing on the board or how strong their ability is, but it's also the interplay and the way your opponent might have to think around those cards as well. We have the Thing. The Thing's a cool card, but he's going in with all the other vanilla characters at this stage. 4/6, not great power push, and I think this is just where he belongs for now. He's going into the E tier. Getting towards the end of our tier list here, we have White Tiger. White Tiger is actually a really strong card. She's going all the way up to A tier for me. She works incredibly well with the Odin on reveal deck, and when you only have access to the starter cards in Marvel Snap, I think that is the strongest deck to be playing, so she works so well in that deck. She also has a little bit of RNG in terms of where the Tiger's going, which is sometimes goes in your favor, sometimes it doesn't work out exactly what you want. But she's essentially a 5/8, which can sneak power into unreachable locations as well. I think she's a really strong card. So then we have Wolfsbane, and for me, Wolfsbane is at the top end of the B tier. I don't think she's quite into A tier quality, but I think she's at the top end of B tier for sure. If you can get her full value with all the cards and her as the final card on the location, you can get up to 7 power, which is really great. But outside of a decent power push to a location, she doesn't have much utility other than that. She does also work relatively well with cards like Nightcrawler, where you think she's the final card, but then you can move out Nightcrawler to get even more power down there. So she works well in that instance. But I think the top end of B tier is where she safely sits for me. Rounding things out, and a card that unfortunately we didn't have on the tier list, but a card that I want to include in this list is Uatu the Watcher. He's a 1-cost 2-power card, which you can foresee the future locations before they've flipped. So definitely an interesting card. His ability is interesting, and you can potentially use it, but often in games it actually doesn't really do anything at all. For me, he's going into D tier. He's okay, and you might play him a little bit early on, but I think he's going to be replaced pretty quickly. Alright, so there we have it. That is my tier list for all of the starter cards you're going to be unlocking in Marvel Snap. Again, just want to say these are my thoughts. This has come out of my experience with playing these cards and playing throughout the game. I didn't put anything notably in F tier. That's because I think every card in the game actually has its place and potentially can be viable in some deck or another. Hey, let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear what you're thinking about different cards in different tiers. If you're having similar thoughts to me or something completely different, let me know. I'd love to chat it out. We're getting tons of good conversation going on in the comments as well. Lots of new players reaching out and lots of people there to help as well. So we've opened up our Discord. It's called the Milk Bar. So come hang out at the Milk Bar. We've got some awesome people in there ready. Lots of people with tons of knowledge, much smarter than me about the game. I'll leave a Discord link to the Milk Bar in the comments and in the description. So jump in, join us there. It's a lot of fun. That's going to wrap us up for this one. Hey, subscribe to the channel, like the video, all that good stuff. Until the next one, I'll see you then.